Hi, I'm Wes, the Explosion, and sometimes I have a bad habit of scrolling Twitter, aka X, and reading stuff that'll cheese me off. I don't do it on purpose, I have it set to following, not for you, but sometimes the accounts I follow engage with takes that are better left ignored. Or Mega Man goes trending and I click on it out of curiosity and see something I'd rather not. Thus, a claim I've been seeing a few people make is that Mega Man was never really a big deal. This, of course, not only got me a bit steamed, but also raised a few questions in my mind, not all of them about the Blue Bomber. This week might be more of a ramble as we enter maybe not a rabbit hole, but more of a pothole as we discuss a few classic platformers. And as a side note, I won't be showing any of the posts in question, partly because I don't want to call anybody out, partly because there was a lot of use of the N-word and I am too pasty to get away with that, even if they would just be screenshots. At least they didn't use the hard R. They call Mega Man the Blue Bomber because he's blue. Words to live by. Though this quote does make me question how our little man ever fell so hard. He used to be a household name. If you're into video games, he was right up there with Mario and Sonic, but these days, a lot of people are either unfamiliar or have only a passing recognition, like maybe knowing him as that blue little boy version of Samus from Smash Bros. I have considered at times whether I had exaggerated his fame and importance due to his franchise being my favorite thing, while it was maybe just an oddity that other people only noticed on their periphery, but a few things have convinced me that I'm not crazy. Whenever I see the question of Rock's importance in the grand scheme of things, I typically also see someone bring up how Capcom might not exist without him, and considering, yeah, that might be right. After all, what else does Capcom have to hang their hat on? There's Monster Hunter, which I remember being a phenomenon on the PSP. Resident Evil was, the PS1? And no one cared about Street Fighter until 2 came out in the arcades and Super Nintendo. Yeah, they might have had some other good arcade titles, and Ghosts and Goblins didn't do too bad for them either, but Mega Man 2 might have been their first major hit for consoles. Correct me if I'm forgetting anyone. While some people might scoff at the sales numbers, saying how 1 million units isn't all that impressive, in the NES days when video games were a much more niche hobby, it really was. So while it might seem weird to say these days, back then, it wasn't surprising that Mega Man was not only their most popular franchise, but the guy was even considered the company mascot. Wikipedia even still has him listed as such, though I could see the argument for Ryu or maybe even Rathalos being made these days. But then how did we get to this point? How did he go from one of the biggest names in the medium to a relatively unknown or at least unacknowledged figure? The other night I was talking with my brother, who said that while some of the other games we were discussing he'd heard a fair bit about, he rarely hears anyone else bring up Mega Man besides me, and that's when I thought about finally considering the numbers. There is a significant age gap between me and my youngest sibling. While I grew up on Ruby Spears and Super Nintendo, then a pre-owned NES, his first console was a Wii, years after its release, with a hand-me-down GameCube until then. And the period that I remember most as being Mega Man's heyday was around 20 years ago, specifically during his 15th anniversary. We had the Anniversary Collection, and Battle Network was taking the world by storm with its unique gameplay, anime, and licensed goods, like action figures and plastic PET. And forget worrying about getting a new game, we were getting entries in 3 different series. Guess I just didn't loan my brother the right games for GameCube, though they probably would have been too hard and off-putting for him anyway. So yeah, Mega Man was a big deal. Mega Man was a big deal, like, 20 years ago, so I guess it's no real surprise that some younger players think that we're exaggerating just how important he is. After all, if he were, why wouldn't he still be getting games? A lot of people cite the oversaturation of titles, making them harder to keep up with, and thus seeing diminishing returns as one of the big reasons, and yeah, that certainly makes sense. After all, when I mentioned new entries in 4 series, I wasn't just talking about one of them a year. Heck, I wasn't even talking about just one per series a year. There's also other things to consider, most notably the departure of Inafune from Capcom. He was the main one pulling for Mega Man, making sure he got new titles, and I also went full conspiracy theory and thought that maybe Capcom canned a bunch of Mega Man stuff despite Inafune, since he did say some unflattering things on his way out. A video from Shadow Rock ZX also raised the possibility that I hadn't considered, that after Inafune left, no one felt up to the task of taking the reins on the series. Was a good video, by the way, if you haven't watched it. I guess what I'm trying to say is that why Mega Man doesn't get new games isn't just a simple matter of how important he was or how good his series was. I think a better metric of how influential Mega Man was could be better gauged by just how many indie titles are clearly inspired by the series. I talked about Virtua Unlimited Project a few weeks back, but there's also 20XX, Gravity Circuit, One Step from Eden, and most famously, Shovel Knight. Then there's all the fan projects, like Mega Man Maker and that Mega Man X Corrupted. You could even go so far as to say that the statement that we don't get any new games is actually untrue. We get a bunch, just none from Capcom. Maybe this is an example of an echo chamber, but I'd say that Mega Man is probably one of the most influential series when it comes to indie stuff, which I think will wind up being very important in the long run. Of course, you could argue that with Mario still getting plenty of titles, who needs to make an indie one? And while there are a few out there for Sonic, like Freedom Planet, Spark the Jester, heck, even Mania to a degree, those are more there to fill a specific style of Sonic that Sega isn't, and that there might be more of them if the well ever dried up. But we'll talk more about those two in just a little bit. My point is, for the moment, that Mega Man did matter, and still very much does, just in a very different way these days. If you ever doubt it, just look up Mega Man 15th anniversary commercials. So, don't make fun of Mega Man. But what even got me started on this? I mentioned something about Twitter? Well, it started with a post I saw dunking on Crash fans, saying the guy didn't have nearly as much influence as the Retro 4 Smash 4 kept advertising itself with. Specifically Mario, Sonic, Mega Man, and Pac-Man. And I'm just gonna do Pac-Man a favor and leave him out of this, since he's kinda the odd one out. Him having a few oddball platformers, but being known more for mazes instead. So we'll be discussing the other four mentioned, and since I already talked for a while on Mega Man, let's move on to Crash. I'll start straight away by saying that I've never played a Crash Bandicoot game. Sorry, grew up in a Nintendo household, if that wasn't obvious. That said, I hear good things about his games and do have a copy of the recent N. Sane trilogy that I just haven't gotten around to playing yet, which I expect to really enjoy. So my question is, why do we gotta crap on the guy? When I play the Crash games, if they suck, that's not going to magically make the lack of Mega Man games not sting. It's not gonna help with any of Sonic's issues either, more on that in a minute. And Mario, anyway. On the contrary, a successful Crash title, which I hear they are, could create more demand for platformers that could get Capcom to take notice or pressure Sega to up their game. While you could argue that Crash doing well could take eyes off of other series, that makes this all seem like a zero-sum game, where people only get one title per genre per console per generation. Why do I want to play Crash Bandicoot? Because I love Mario, I love Sonic, I especially love Mega Man, and want to play more platformers, and I see no reason why the reverse couldn't also be true. So, until the unlikely event where I play his games and explain to you how they somehow retroactively ruined my childhood, stop picking on Crash. But how did we get here? Oh god damn it. Another tweet. I think I finally found the origin point of this whole thing. Of some freaky caricatures of Crash and Mario leering over Sonic, with text implying that he's either washed up or on the verge of it. And by someone with a Mega Man-inspired username, so we're not in the clear on this either. Let me Google the definition. Deposited by the tide on a shore. Okay, that technically happened in the last movie, but I don't think that's the one they were going for. Of a person, no longer effective or successful. While you could make an argument for that, you'd have to be using some pretty skewed logic. Was Sega disappointed with the sales of Superstars? Yes, but I'm not going to condemn the whole series due to one game, especially since there were still a lot of people who did like it. Did Sonic Frontiers see a pretty early price drop? Also yes, but there was still a pretty big push for it to get the People's Choice for Game of the Year, which is impressive. Still not sure how Genshin qualified. And all of that is also ignoring how excited people are for the Generations remake, the 2 movies with a spin-off on Paramount Plus and a third on the way, his Netflix series, and how easy it is to find merch of him when you walk into a toy section at Walmart, Target, or GameStop. So is Sonic unsuccessful? No, not unless you have a very weird view on the concept. Effective though, well, that's a little more complicated. There was recently a comment from Sega saying that they still wanted to beat Mario, which was a little hard not to poke fun at. During the Genesis era, I'd say that they stood a decent chance, them being pretty neck and neck. Ironically, I'd even say it was doable still right after they dropped out of the console business, with their adventure ports and advanced titles being not too bad. After that, something seems to have happened though, since quality's been all over the place. We've gotten some really terrible stuff, like 06 and Secret Rings, some with more mixed reviews like Unleashed and Sonic Heroes, and some really stellar titles, like Mania and Forces. No wait, I'm the only one who liked Forces. Mania and Generations. Yeah. My point is, you can't beat Mario with all over the place, and I myself like to joke that whenever I pick up a Sonic game these days, there's a 50-50 shot I'll enjoy it. Loved Mania and Forces, hated Frontiers and Superstars, though I imagine most people will swap two of them. And yet, I continue to buy them. I'm also looking forward to watching Sonic 3 in theaters, hopefully within the first week, and maybe considering even doing some reviews on some of the titles. And when I laugh at Sega thinking that they want to compete with Mario, deep down, I really just want to see another era where that's a real possibility. So would I say that Sonic is ineffective? No, just maybe a little less effective than he used to be. So don't call Sonic washed up. Unless you're specifically at that one spot in the second movie. Then it's fine. But of the four we're discussing, you know the one fan base I didn't see talking smack or getting defensive? Mario. He has nothing to prove, he's proven it already. He gets games all the time, unlike Mega Man. No one's ever gonna deny his influence on video games, unlike Crash. And unlike Sonic, I find it hard to think of a single bad Mario game outside of some questionable third-party stuff they did way back when. I mean, I wasn't really a fan of tennis, and some of the Mario Party games have been pretty heavily criticized, but that isn't even mainline stuff. Mega Man fans can be elitist. I've been told that the security lasers are baby stuff, and my brother's been criticized for incorrectly citing Base Cross as being from Battle Network 5. Which it was! Crash fans, I don't know much about, so I'm not gonna say anything mean. But you let me know some of the nasty stuff you get up to. Sonic fans can sometimes rally around titles that aren't nearly as good as what they used to get, and the brand itself has been known to throw shade. But when I try to think of toxic Mario fans, even though I feel like I should have something, nothing major comes to mind. Just some people who thought that they changed Peach's personality too much for the movie. And when I tried searching toxic Mario fans, I turned up mostly people saying that the Mario fanbase is actually one of the nicer ones, with a few saying that some of the side series can get a little weird. So I think we should be more like Mario. Another series failing doesn't make ours any better. In my opinion, going after another fandom just stinks of desperation and makes you look weak. Like a bully picking on someone to mask their own pain, or that type of thinking people do where they watch reality TV because, hey, no matter how bad things are in their life, at least they're not that screwed up. While I think it's perfectly fine to have preferences and believe that your favorite is the best, if you need to resort to name-calling, you failed at basic argument making and have already lost. So on principle, you shouldn't talk smack on Mario, but if you do, he will not care. Unless he can get you for copyright. Nintendo! That kinda wraps up that tangent, but let's circle back to Mega Man, since that's kind of my bread and butter here. I feel like how much importance you place on the series comes down mostly to age, which feels really weird since this wasn't something that I thought would make me feel a generational gap. TikTok, Fortnite, and Skibidi Toilet, sure, but Mega Man? I blame Capcom for not keeping the ball rolling. If you think that Mega Man's a niche series that never really mattered and its importance is greatly overstated by a bunch of fanboys, you're probably fairly young and think you understand past events better than the people that were actually around for them. And if you find yourself spewing the same sort of crap I did a second ago and thinking that the kids of today are just a bunch of snotty brats who can't beat NES titles due to skill issues, congratulations, you are now the old man, yelling at the young kids from your porch, rambling about how things were better in your day, and probably using the word whippersnapper. I don't think either of them's an enviable position, so let's try something different. If you think that Mega Man hype is overblown by the retro crowd, take a step back and just consider how the late 80s, 90s, and early 2000s were a much different time, especially anywhere where technology's involved. And if you're getting tired of newer gamers claiming that we're lying about how big Mega Man is, do the same, but from the standpoint that, with as much as Mega Man's been minimized for the past 15 or 20 years, that it really does sound unbelievable and made up that he was as major as he was. Hopefully, we can all agree that we want more good games, which I think Mega Man could provide again if given the chance, and until then, there's other titles in the genre to play. So be nice is my overall point, I guess, and hope for success for rival series as well, since when games are good, we all win. Oh, and don't feed the trolls. If you see someone rage baiting, just find something else to engage with. And while I hope this is obvious, given all the stuff I've been saying, if you do happen to see any of the posts I referenced, don't harass anyone. Now's the time I would normally ask for responses, but what exactly can I ask? This whole thing was more of a ramble rather than anything carefully thought out, so I guess you can tell me if I was off base on anything. Maybe I was too harsh on Sonic, maybe I was totally off about Mario and his fanbase is actually a bunch of gremlins, or maybe I'm giving Mega Man either too much or not nearly enough credit. And anything you have to say about Crash. Whatever you say, just try to keep it civil. I'm all talked out, so thanks as always for watching, and maybe consider subscribing if you're into Mega Man. Also, anyone else find it weird that the 4 platformers we talked about all have kart racer spin-offs?